Amendment number 21, offered by Ms. Ernst.
Gentlelady from Iowa is recognized in support of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And again, as we've discussed previously, Senator Perdue just acknowledged that the most essential role that we have as a federal government and as a Congress is to raise that revenue and fund our federal government. But since 1974, we have only passed all of our appropriations bills 4 times, and in the past 20 years, we've only passed a budget 11 times. So I do think we can do better. Many of us do believe that, and the only way that we will do better in the absence of political will is by forcing ourselves to do this. And my amendment would establish consequences for senators if we do fail to pass a budget and our appropriations bills on time. So the way it works, if we haven't passed a budget by May 1st of an odd-numbered year and all appropriations bills by the beginning of each fiscal year, then the Senate would be unable to adjourn for more than 8 hours. No funds would be available for official travel for senators, and we would do 2 quorum calls per day to ensure that senators are staying in Washington to get their work done. Now, Congressman Arrington will be offering a similar amendment that will apply to the House of Representatives, and paired together, these common sense amendments would provide a very powerful incentive for Congress to complete a budget and get our appropriations bills done. So state work periods are very important to all of us, believe me. I do a 99 county tour every year. It's called the Full Grassley. We do owe it to our constituents to complete our work on time. So we do understand those state work periods are important, but funding the government takes precedence. So I do think we should stay here until we get that work done. Thank you. I yield back my time, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman from Washington, Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So I think one of the things that has frustrated me and certainly frustrates my constituents is that when Congress fails to do its job currently, when there's a continuing resolution or worse, a government shutdown, the consequences of that failure of Congress to do its job falls on them. You know, I represent a large naval base where when the government shut down for 17 days, people got furloughed and weren't sure whether they were going to be able to put food on the table. I represent more military veterans than nearly anybody in the House. And the uncertainty that that provoked when there's a government shutdown causes a lot of pain on the ground. When the national park in my district was shut down for 17 days, that not only impacted those federal employees, it impacted the local businesses that depended on park visitors to come and visit. And so as we go through these amendments that set up enforcement mechanisms, I intend to vote for them, and I intend to vote for them because I think it changes the game so that the consequences don't fall on our constituents when Congress doesn't do its job. It falls on Congress when Congress doesn't do its job. And it pains me that a mechanism like this is necessary, but I think if passed as prologue, it may indeed be necessary. And right now, the consequences of inaction by Congress fall on our constituents, and I don't think that's right. I don't think it's right to put that pain on the folks we represent. So I'll support this amendment and the others too.
Mr. Chair. Senator Langford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. The very first meeting we had together when, as I described it then, we were all in our early optimistic phase. When we gathered at that point, we all discussed what is it we want to get out of this. And I think everyone around the table mentioned the end of CRs and the end of government shutdowns. I think we all did. And the conversation has spun around those 2 items with bipartisan conversations, bicameral conversations. How do you do that? How do you end CRs? How do you end government shutdowns? This is the way that bubbled out, that you create a mechanism where you stay to be able to finish the work. Now, I came into the House in 2011, and in January 2011, the first thing we had to do was to be able to pass the spending that was punted from 2010, that they didn't want to finish it then, so they punted it to 2011. So I started by working on appropriation bills from the previous years because that had been carried. That's been done year after year and will continue to be done until we have something in place to, as the Representative Kilmer said, actually we have to do our job, and that is stay in place. I can't tell you the number of times there's been a CR that's passed, and I get home and I'm out doing town hall meetings or in the grocery store, and someone catches me and says, "What are you doing here? I thought y'all were in Washington, D.C. Is the funding done?" And I have to look at them and go, "No, it's not done. It got punted for 2 or 3 months." But they're still amazed we're back in state when they know our job is still really here. This is pretty simple. This is, we have a job to do. We stay and negotiate until the job is done. It provides a leverage. All of us have seen Congress only acts when it has to. This puts the has to, and we stay and work it out.
Senator Perdue.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We already have a model, I mentioned this earlier, that actually works. This year, we had an opportunity to fund 100% of our federal government discretionary spending on time. We got very close. On July 31, however, we only had 12% of appropriation bills done in the United States Senate. Now, the House was ahead of us at that time, but only 12%. Had we gone home in August, that's where we would have been, because when we came back in September, we only had something like 10 or 11 work days in the Senate to fund the other 88% of the federal discretionary budget. As it turned out, we stayed in the Senate in August and not only passed 43 confirmations, but we took appropriations from 12% complete to 75% complete. And I don't consider that success, but it's a step in the right direction, and it does show that even though you haven't changed the political will, by putting consequences on, you actually can get our work done.
Representative Lowy.
Well, with great respect for all of our members on both sides of the aisle, I'm not going to read my statement again. But I still want to say very briefly that this amendment doesn't address the major reasons for not passing appropriations resolution. I've talked before about the authorizers not doing their work, riders. We have 100 riders or more. So there are a lot of reasons why we don't complete our work, and maybe we should have some more discussions about them. I'm not sure that there are many who would oppose attaching hundreds of riders to these appropriations bills. But, so I'm going to oppose this amendment. You don't want to hear a long statement again. Thank you.
Any other comments? Representative Arrington.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with our co-chair in her previous comments about the lack of political will. And I think we would all agree that the nature of this body politic does not seem to be able to muster the collective will to do some things. It's like human nature. If you don't acknowledge it and then deal with it, you'll get the same ridiculous, dysfunctional outcomes. So in agreeing that we have a political will problem, we have to look at the incentives and rightly align them so that we get the behavior that not just that we need to function, that the American people are counting on us to put in place so that we do the basic job of just funding the government. And so this to me is pretty fundamental. I don't know, I'm a new member again, and so it's fresh on my mind. I know if you go back and think about when you ran for the first time and you railed against the dysfunction of this institution. And you said it's broken and they just don't know how we in real America operate every day. And then you come up here and it's just like, here I have this unbelievable